So in this video, we're going to talk about the ethics of source handling. Why do we need to do all this citation stuff? It often does seem like a bother, but there are real ethical reasons that we have to practice source handling. So citation helps you as an author improve your ethos. It makes you look more savvy about what you're talking about, and it also makes you look humble and not arrogant because you're like, well, let me give credit to other people. But also it makes it clear that you've read what other people are having to say about the material and that you know what is going on in the field. The more material that you have, obviously, the more detail you can get into. It gives you more to talk about. And it also improves your rapport with your readers because they now look at you as an expert because you've absorbed the knowledge from the other things. It helps your reader by giving them context for what you're talking about. It gives them a way to verify what you're talking about by giving them alternative sources that they can go to, and it allows your reader to respond intelligently and effectively to your argument by having those other sources. And then it helps other researchers who may be your readers by giving credit and distinguishing between what each researcher is contributing. So it directs other readers also to their works, and your readers get directed to their works, that is, and it provides references that they can use for your own research. So as you're looking for sources, you can be looking at the sources that you find and look at the sources that they use, and that can be a really helpful tool for you. So how do you ethically navigate source handling? The first thing is to use a style manual. And the trick with a style manual is that there's always a table of contents. And so the first thing you do is you look up in your table of contents some description of what it is you have in your hand. So you look at the thing and you say, okay, well, this is an article from a scholarly journal that I got off of a database. Then you look through the table of contents, and it might be under electronic resources or it might be under articles. Wherever it is, you're going to find something that's similar to that description, and you find that. And then you use that table of contents to find what page, or if it's a digital style manual such as Purdue OWL, you click on it and it'll take you to examples for similar sources to the one you have in your hand. Um, be aware of the different parts of each citation style and what their function is. So be aware of when you're looking at an author's name versus when you're looking at an editor's name or a translator's name. Be aware when you're looking at a first name or second name, or more properly, when you're looking at a given name or a surname, because in some cultures, your surname, that is your last name, comes first. And so you want to be aware of when you look at a citation, is that where the surname goes or where the given name goes, so that you know exactly what you're looking at, so that you can read citations and write them. One thing that you want to be aware of as well is the difference between title of the larger work that something appears in and title of the work itself. So articles appear in a larger context in a magazine, a journal, or a newspaper or something like that. So you want to make sure that you can distinguish between those things, and you want to be aware of what your style manual is recommending to do to distinguish between them, whether it's putting things in quotation marks or italics or whatever their method is. So auto citation tools. They are very useful, and I've had many students use them to great success, and I'm not saying by any means that you should not use them. Absolutely, go ahead and use them. They're right there, they're fast, they're easy, but you always need to be aware of how to read and write your citations yourself so that you can correct those citations when you use them, because the computer doesn't always know what it's looking at the same way that you would know what you're looking at. Computers don't have the same analytical skills that humans do yet. So notice that, for instance, if you use the citation tool when you're in OneSearch, it may have put everything in all caps because it was entered into the database that way, but the style manual that you're using might want a different capitalization scheme. So don't just assume that it's correct because that's what you got from the auto citation tool. Be aware of what the conventions in the style you're working with are so that you can correct for that. Um, yeah, that all caps thing is definitely the most common thing I see. But there's a lot of other issues, like maybe when the item was entered into the database, they put the translator's name under the author's name or something like that. And so you, the human, are better able to adjust for that. Um, it's also important that your reader can trace what you're doing. That's partly why we use these standardized styles, because the standardized styles make a quick and easy way to transmit to our reader what we're up to, and a quick and easy way for them to understand what we're doing. The most important thing isn't that you know where to put periods and commas and stuff, because oh my gosh, that changes every 2 years, I swear. The most important thing is that you know what each piece is and how that piece is used to find the sources and how you can communicate that. So a manuscript might get rejected for publication for not having the punctuation correct or for not having the most updated version of MLA. In fact, I have colleagues who have submitted a article, and when they submitted it, they used the most updated version of MLA, but by the time it was read for review, MLA had updated, and so their paper got automatically rejected for not being updated. So in that case, they simply resubmitted it and had it updated. What's important, though, is that you're being transparent, that your reader knows when you're using sources and what those sources are coming from. So even though you might be rejected for not having your commas in the right place or whatever, it's not plagiarism as long as you're being transparent. Which is what brings me to the ethical issues. So this plagiarism word, the big scary P word, it's an ethical concern, not a legal concern. So I often get students saying, well, if I plagiarize, I'll go to jail or I'll be fined or something. Not really. That's not how that works. There are legal protections for authors, that is copyright and trademark, and those do come with they would be civil, not criminal suits, so they would come with monetary damages and so on. But that's not what we're talking about when we talk about plagiarism. That's an entirely different aspect, and that's only an issue when there's money on the line. In most research, there's not really any money on the line for publishing that research. There's money on the line for doing the research, for getting the grant, but that's a different issue as well. So plagiarism is dealt with at an institutional level. Institutions that receive government funding, such as, most public college, any public college, most colleges, honestly, are required to have some system in place of dealing with plagiarism, but what that system is not defined by that rule. So you're responsible for knowing what the definitions of ethical student conduct are in the student handbook. Even if you haven't read it, it's kind of like that user agreement at the beginning of any software. You're technically responsible for what's inside of that. So maybe go read that at some point. Plagiarism isn't just copying, it's misrepresenting something. So when you copy, you misrepresent that work and you say, I wrote this, when you didn't. When you commit accidental plagiarism, which is a real thing and it's something to be aware of, because our policy does not distinguish between accidental and intentional plagiarism, where you accidentally omit the parts that would tell your reader that you're using a source, you're misrepresenting by accident, by implying that you wrote that. And yes, that is a real thing, and yes, I've seen it, I've even done it. Everyone is susceptible to accidental plagiarism, and the only way to prevent it is very careful planning, and your bibliography should be an excellent tool for helping you with that. There is one other kind of plagiarism that is extremely controversial, but when we understand plagiarism as misrepresentation rather than as copying, then it makes more sense, and that's self plagiarism. In most policies, every policy I've ever looked at, um, turning in your own work that you did for another class without explicit permission in advance from your instructor is plagiarism. And that feels wrong because you're like, well, it's my work. I can do what I want with it. And yes, it is your work. You can do what you want with it. Legally, the copyright is yours. The problem is that you're misrepresenting what the work's nature is. You're saying to your teacher, I did this in response to your assignment, when in fact you did it in response to someone else's assignment. And that is misrepresentation. And so the biggest issue is it's an ethical issue of representation. Are you accurately portraying the work that you did? So remember that it is an ethical concern. It's not a legal concern. It's plagiarism and other academic misconduct is a way that we relate to each other, is a break of social norms. So it's more like if you were to sleep with your best friend's partner. So there's no law against it. There's no, you can't be taken to court for it or whatever, but you just wouldn't do it. Everyone understands that there's something really wrong about that because it's a violation of trust. It's a violation of your relationship, and it's a misrepresentation of your relationship. And so plagiarism is very much the same kind of an issue. There's not any laws necessarily, although there are policies within an institution. But the key of it is it's an ethical problem. You're misrepresenting your work, and in the process, you're hurting your own reputation and the reputation of those around you. So when we have a plagiarism case, it damages the reputation of the institution, and honestly, your degree is only as good as the institution's reputation. The only reason a Ball State University degree has any value is because people look at Ball State University and say, oh, yeah, that's a good school. So you want to police yourself and your peers to make sure that you behave in a way that gives you a good reputation in association with your institution. So that's really the nuts and bolts of what plagiarism is and why we call it an ethical concern. So as you work on documenting your sources, just be aware that the best way to prevent accidental plagiarism and the best way to get yourself out of situations where plagiarism might be temptation is good planning and good documentation in advance. So work hard on that bibliography. I'll see you next week.